uppercut, try to hit me in the gut, thinking that I won't react. You whispering my name, thinking I won't be the same. Turn fiction into fact. See what you didn't know, bruises that I'll never show, slipping on your every jab. So tighten up your fist, step into the ring with this. I hope your mama's got your back. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, blowing the sound of my name in the crowd. You hit a bus. Oh, 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 oh. You hit a bus. Oh, 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 oh. Just 'cause I took a break, you're making a huge mistake, thinking you can take the throne. Look at you trembling, step into the lion's den, bet you wish you stayed at home. Begging for mercy underneath your breath when I ain't even sweating yet, my legend's written in the stone, yeah.
Hey, Nick. Sean Spicer. I understand there's some controversy brewing about how many subscribers you have on YouTube. You have more subscribers than anybody. And it's probably the biggest, largest YouTube subscription that anybody's had. But also, it's not numbers that matter, Nick. And I know everyone's going to quibble over this, but it's content. It's quality. And your subscribers are amazing. They're great. They're high quality subscribers, and that's really what you have to look at. Don't just focus on the numbers. I mean, if people are spewing a bunch of fake news, just don't get in the mud. They're amazing folks. Their engagement, the way that they like the videos. Anyway, I hope this puts this to the end. I hope that this controversy is over and we know who the real YouTube subscriber champ is, and it's you, Nick.
Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to yeah. It wouldn't be in time without a 10-second hot mic incident. Happy Friday to you too. Yeah, a little quick peek behind the scenes there. Well, now we had Pat on, and there's Pat, and he was sitting there giving me a hard time comparing me to CNN 2, and then just to see Titan saying the same thing. Thanks. So oh well, welcome to After Dark yet again. 4 shows this week. 3 were on time, 3 of them. But yeah, you know what? When we get the kind of revenue that CNN gets, we'll be on time like CNN. Hopefully, we'll do better news than CNN, and I don't think that's a particularly high bar. But nonetheless, I think we clear that bar half the time anyway. But all right. Well, anyway, so how is everybody doing? Pat is Andring. Thank you for joining us. Although it's Andring, there's a little background noise because I know you're working on your truck there, and it's just ow. That's what happens because I got the headphones on. Ow, yeah, that hurts. What were you gonna say, Pat?
And it's Friday, so I'm drinking. So we're gonna have a lively drunk history with Pat Lowinger tonight.
It's gonna get in. I actually had a history question. I can't remember. I've just been like burning the midnight oil and the candle at both ends, or the oil at. I don't know what burns, but at any rate.
So you keep saying you're a historian, right? And then you throw me questions from like the 18th, 16th, and 20th century. You understand that I'm an ancient historian and a classical archaeologist, right? Like anything after like the 8th, 9th century, I'm not the guy to ask anything about. Like, even though I study the late antique period, like I'm not even a medievalist. Like you need specialists, in these areas. I mean, I'm a generalist even in the areas I study.
I agree we need specialists, but we're stuck with you. So what are we going to do? I mean,
well, I'm gonna start asking for a chronological date of reference for your question before I even entertain it.
Oh shit! Yeah, I want to rebuild the Rolodex. We had a Rolodex of just sort of go-to people, and historians were one that actually we often had enough. The hard part is finding somebody who's both qualified and doesn't mind going on YouTube and just talking about this shit live. That's the hard part. But Dr. Misha Griffith, we haven't had on in a very long time, and I'd love to catch up with her. But she was our go-to for quite some time, and she was a history professor at I think it was Washington State University of Washington. I think it was University of Washington. So, I'd love to sort of catch up with her, and she was a great go-to because she'd also be available at the bizarre hours. When we did the invasion of the Iran and Iraq fighting each other, she just called her up and she's like, okay, here's the history of the regions, and we got to, in 5 minutes, we got a complete history of Iran and Iraq and why they're pissed at each other, which is pretty tough considering it's a 3,000-year history, but she did really well with it.
Well, when you talk about something every day, it gets pretty easy. I mean, people started asking me, "Oh, can you give us a 30-minute summation of the Peloponnesian War?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can do that." Do you have to study it? No, I can pretty much do it off the top of my head.
Oh, well, so what got you interested in history anyway? It's pretty late in the game to just go for your PhD in history. I'm just saying.
Well, like we've discussed privately, that my wife said I couldn't be retired and stay at home and do nothing. So I retired pretty early from law enforcement. I was 44 years old, and my wife's exact words were, "I'm not going to sit around and have you yell and scream at CNN all day as you watch TV." So she basically said, do something. So I initially looked into going into law. Did a couple years of law school and hated it. Realized that law enforcement into law is not something to do. Did some legal investigation work for a while and decided I wanted to go back to school. So went back to school, got my first master's in ancient history, and then my second master's in archaeology, and then now continuing forward. Now, each time I told my wife, this is going to be it. I'm done. So, now I've misrepresented my educational aspirations to her at least twice. So the first master's was so I could teach, right? I was like, I'll just go teach. So I was either going to do community college. I teach at a community college now, but that was the goal, was I'd teach history at community college. And what's interesting is I get asked all the time to teach law enforcement, and I refuse anything law enforcement related. Like, nope.
Oh, I definitely want to investigate that, but I do want to say so, and just because Maya brought this up. Yeah, Dr. Misha is one of my favorite people just in general. I love her. She and I haven't had a chance to catch up in a while, but we used to just shoot the shit in between shows. We had her on quite regularly, and she was a blast. And if she had a patron, I would absolutely be supporting it. I'd be like, she is at the old shows, the ones that we did. She'd actually proposed a show, and this is still one of my favorite shows. And I thought this was going to be. What we usually do is when we're getting a guest, we'll say, okay, we want you on for this, but if there's another topic that interests you, why don't you pick that? And then we get them booked twice. It's great. And so we had her on, and I forget what the topic was, but we had her on for a topic of our choosing, and then I said, what topic would you like to do? The difference in media between the United States and Europe. And I was just like, you've got to be fucking kidding me. And I was just like, yeah, that sounds really interesting. I'm sure the members of our audience that need, that are suffering from insomnia will love that topic. And it was absolutely amazing because, of course, Europe, and this wasn't what I had been considering, which was in Europe, the media belongs to the governments. So the BBC is government-owned, of course, British broadcast. All the airwaves are owned by the governments in every country over there. And there's legit straight-up reasons why, which you wouldn't think of. But in the U.S., for us, that would be like the first step to tyranny. If the United States government said, we're going to control the airwaves, oh my God, would be freaking out. There'd be rioting. Zandring would be up there with all 5 guns at the same time, just going, okay, come get my radio stations, But there's a whole historical.
Control the airwaves.
They license them. That's true, and the FCC does have, but they're not owned by. So that's a very good. That's an important distinction. But they're still not owned by, and in fact, you're allowed to get a CB and broadcast locally. And you can't actually do that in the in England. Now, you're going to say, I do want to quickly hit the super chat $4.99. Constellation Pegasus, what do you think of Berknot 6A6 in the Babylonian Talmud? Pretty bizarre. I have no idea what that means. But Pat, the floor is yours, both to answer my thing. It was a great show. But yeah.
Again, I'm gonna channel Josh Bowen here. The Babylonian Talmud is not my area of expertise. I am not going to comment on various translations and iterations of the Babylonian Talmud after I've had 2 glasses of wine and a beer, and I'm going on my fourth, my Corona Fresca for the night. But yeah, if you'd like to write a detailed question, send it to me in an email. I'll be more than happy to look at the reference material for you.
Well, so, and by the way, we got a link. It is both in the description and pinned at the top. So if you want to come and join us, it's an open hang tonight. But that show with Misha, first of all, she's just got this great sense of humor. And she ended up, I forget how, but she ended up talking about how, misconceptions about various things in media. And one of them about how, that rats carry plague. And she said, really, it's actually not the rats. You get it. Other kinds like squirrels and chipmunks are a big problem. So what you really got to do is you got to kill all the chipmunks. So that's where she got the title. What was it? Chipmunk genocidal or chipmunk genocide. I forget. I got to look it up. But we've been calling her that for forever, and she just ran with it. And so she just has adopted that title. It's amazing to find someone like she's kind of the complete package. It's a lot of fun having her on. So I can't say enough about her, but she's she just ended up not being able to stream anywhere for a while, and she's been dipping her toe back into other streams, which has been spectacular. Just great to see her back on YouTube. It's very erratic and intermediate. So intermittent. So we just haven't had a chance to, but it looks like she's doing great. So we'll I should link that show because that is still one of my favorites, and it was amazing how interesting it was, how they view media over there versus how we do. It's actually really quite different. So it sounds like you're going to say something, Pat.
Well, I was going to ask you to drop the link to StreamYard into the private chat so I can Shanghai a couple people. Since there's questions about the Babylonian Talmud, I might actually be able to find someone who's qualified to actually answer questions about the Babylonian Talmud. Sure. And then we just abuse them the rest of the stream.
Oh, that sounds perfect. Let me what do I do with that link there? The link is right here. Let me grab that link.
It's like I tell people, I don't necessarily have to be able to translate the text we're talking about. I know someone who can.
Who are you thinking? Is it someone I know, or is it now? Why do I not have access to the?
Oh, I'm trying to. I was thinking about dunking on Dr. Jim Majors.
Oh, yeah, he's got
Sending
the link.
Him the link and saying, "Come on."
I sent him the link, but definitely hit him up. I haven't actually texted him, but I'm going to send you another copy of the link here. I'm going to have to. It's not letting me really access the back end chat. I don't know why, so I'm just going to send it to you. Well, you should already have. I suppose you already have it on. Okay, let me try one more time then. Oh yeah, there you go. Private chat. There you go. That's. Hit the right button, and then maybe I could do it. So there you go. I just sent it to you. And Jim, okay. I think has it on Twitter. So if he checks his Twitter account, he'll also have a copy. We are not calling his mother tonight.
Yeah.
I'm not going through that again.
Exactly.
So just tell him calling his mom is all. I wish this was a joke. Yeah. I was like, what were you gonna say?
I always love it when I always love it when someone goes, yeah, there's this word in Hebrew. And I think it's wrong because I have a generalist understanding of a couple of languages. Very, very introductory level. And I'm thinking, I read somewhere there's some questions about that. And being able to dial your phone and go, hey, is this right? As you're standing there talking to the person who's misrepresenting the information, and especially in an academic context, they go, no, that's actually not it. And then they cite 5 sources. I've literally done this, just held the phone and let someone explain to a colleague why they're wrong.
Oh,
because as an archaeologist, my interest in language is largely epigraphic, right? So if it's in an inscription or something, I have a very rote and methodological approach to translation. I find an inscription, I translate it, and it's very rote. Ancient Latin and ancient Greek are I'm not going to say they're easy. Greek's harder than Latin for me, but when you start getting into it, there's people that are fluent in an ancient language. I'm never going to say that. I can find a piece of text. I can translate it with proper reference material and come up with something that's not going to embarrass me when I write a paper, as far as translation. But there are people that have mastered, ancient languages, and Jim's one of them when it comes to Hebrew.
I did not know that.
I think it's yeah, his knowledge of Hebrew is pretty impressive. And I work with academics all the time. It's my job. And I've found that there are people who, they take 2 or 3 years of Hebrew and they consider themselves highly proficient. And I'm like, let's talk to Dr. Jim Majors. He says you're wrong.
Dr. Jim Majors, that's still a little weird for me, but he's more than earned it. But Dr. Jim, yep.
No. Well, that's my goal, is to be Dr. Pat.
Oh,
right. So ultimately, that's it. It is kind of funny. I often get a falsely ascribed PhD. Many students, when they come in, they see my age and they assume, they go, oh, well, this guy's got to have a PhD. And they start calling me Dr. Pat. I'm like, oh, no. You guys are community college. You can't afford a PhD. Just kidding. But yeah. So yeah, it's fun. But you think about the expertise that goes into getting a terminal degree, something like now I know Jim's specialty is the apocalyptic literature of Daniel, right? So when you want to talk about the book of Daniel, that's what he wrote his dissertation on. It's not a insignificant body of literature to go through, particularly considering that you not only have to master the primary information, but all the secondary literature as well. You have to know whose arguments are strong and weak in the field, what the fields look like for the last 200 years. It's no small undertaking. There's a reason a PhD takes people 5 years at minimum.
Oh, Jesus, yeah. And I've
in some cases you can get it done in 3.5, 4 if you're on fire.
Yeah, but you have to, and in that case, usually you have to have a supportive spouse who's bringing in the money so that you can dedicate that kind of time to it. Right. I've considered going back and getting a PhD, and I'm very ambivalent because it's sort of like I don't actually need one. It's like what do I necessarily need one for? I can teach high school. I can teach. If I wanted to teach college, okay, maybe. But so I don't need one. It would be more just to be called Dr. Suitor, and if I stand close enough to my wife, I get the Dr. Suitor by proxy, I guess. So, right. I don't know. I've thought about it, but it's sort of it's one of the, for me it was always a life goal, and I just kind of assumed I'd get one. But after I graduated college, I came very close. A number of reasons I didn't go after a PhD at that point. And then I just wrote a book instead. But I'll say why I didn't. I didn't because the only 2 topics I wanted to get a PhD in, psychology or philosophy, my father both hated. He thought, philosophy was absolutely worthless, and of course, you're not going to make much money at it. And psychology, he really didn't like. He thought that whole thing was a scam. And I think it was still important to me what he thought, so I ended up not doing it.
Right. Well, for me, the PhD is a little bit of vanity. I want one.
Yeah.
I don't know if teaching in a community college, whether or not I need one. But I've played around with it so much, and after doing 2 masters, I'm like, I kind of want a PhD now. It's kind of like, and is it reasonable at I'm over 50, 52 soon. It's like, is going for a PhD, I'm not going to be done till I'm 56 if I stay on my current trajectory. So 56 years old and you get a PhD, you're going to teach for what, a decade? and then you're going to want to be retired. But I've been retired once, and retirement kind of sucks. Semi-retirement's the best. Teach part-time, that's awesome. But when, typically when you're a newer person, going into academia, you work harder. You're expected to teach more, do more committee work and all that, which is something I'm doing right now.
Well, and I appreciate the honesty. I think for me, it's pretty much the same, right? I want it's ego, and I spend a lot of time around PhDs. I am a black sheep in my family. Most of my father was a lawyer. That isn't, in my view, a PhD. It certainly wasn't in his view, but I guess, what is it? The bar, United States Bar Association came out and said, yes, it is. It's a PhD in jurisprudence. I was like, yeah, sorry, I'm not sure. I'd go with that, but nonetheless, it's still an advanced degree. And then, his father was a doctor. I have multiple doctors in my family, have multiple lawyers, and have multiple PhDs, including 2 aunts. And my wife, of course, has a PhD. So it's sort of like I'm the black sheep. I'm the lowest educated. And the good news is, since it doesn't necessarily mean anything, you know what I mean? Everybody in the family just sort of like, you bring to the table what you bring to the table. The PhD doesn't bring anything by itself. It's what do you know? What do you, and there are plenty of fields in which, I outstrip all of them.
I agree.
But, it's still just, I'm keenly aware that I'm one of the few suitors that doesn't have a degree in anything past college. Well,
the biggest undertaking I've taken academically is writing my book, which is coming out in February, by the way. I'm very happy about that.
Nice.
But, writing a book is no small undertaking. And I think, there's multiple ways to kind of put yourself out there academically speaking. I know, and I don't mean this in any way sounding demeaning, but it may come off that way to people outside of academia. But there are some people with master's degrees, and I don't say only master's degrees, but that's typically how they're referred to by academics with PhDs. There are people with master's degrees that hold, 1 or 2 master's degrees who write some extremely good introductory texts to certain topics. And for largely, in many regions, those texts are just kind of pushed off. Like, person who wrote this only has a master's degree, so we're going to, the person with a PhD obviously writes better. And I think there's a disconnect between what is your degree title sometimes and your ability to express information at the introductory level to a student and or interested person outside of the discipline. And I've met some people who, particularly in anthropology, because archaeology being adjacent or in the same field, I'm not going to argue that debate. I just did that earlier today. It's too long. But archaeology and anthropology being related disciplines, I know some people who hold, 1 or 2 master's degrees in anthropology, various types, and I'd rather take a class with them than someone with a terminal degree, 30 years teaching anthro at an Ivy League school, because their inability to relay information just sucks. And that comes out in writing too often. People tend to discuss in a classroom the same way they write. And if you can't discuss the topic well, you're probably not going to write it well. I think there's exceptions to these rules, obviously, but I've met some people that they're like, wow, why'd you write this introductory text on ancient Greek religion? That's my next book coming up. And they're like, I'm like, well, I wrote the manuscript for submission and, it'll come out because I think the other books suck. There's some really good ones, but not enough for someone just to pick up on a shelf at, if you're not doing coursework in the field. I think there's some needs out there. And besides, you got to write a book, man. I mean, that's just the way it is.
I think you're nobody until you've written a book. Well, and to tell you the truth,
obviously, because that's.
To tell you the truth, the other thing is, of course, too, and I think this is along the same lines, especially in science, but also in any number of fields. The really high end, the people at the high end, they're not good at teaching and they're not good at communicating what they're doing. They can communicate with other scientists. They can communicate with other people who are, also specialists in that field. But when it comes to communicating to anybody else in general, oh dear Lord, it's sort of like, so what do you do for a living? Well, what I do is I take, and this is the watered down. It's like, well, I take X-rays that are produced from slamming particles together at this really high speed. You can get these special kinds of X-rays that allow you to take crystallized particles and bounce them off of those, and then 5 minutes later, and it's like, what do you do? Takes pictures of molecules with X-rays. That's what you do. You take pictures of molecules with X-rays. You don't have to describe the process. It's like, that's what you do. And it's actually really important for any number of reasons. But it's just this so I do think that, and I don't know if that's a natural process that happens, that you get more inculcated into the jargon and it becomes harder to communicate with the average person, or if it's just people who are naturally excel at teaching, would be teaching as opposed to spending all the time learning the advanced levels of those fields. But at any rate, it does seem the more advanced you get in any field, the harder time you have communicating with laymen in general. So I think there's a real need for people who can bridge that.
I generally would agree, but I think part of the reason, if you're used to talking in technical language all the time, it's sometimes because the technical language is important in the field. It's sometimes hard to break it down into colloquial language, right? I have a friend, and it's just funny. Like people joke, my friend, the astrophysicist, because I actually have one, right? We can talk in general terms over a few beers about, some ideas, and then I'll ask a question, and they go, I can't really explain that to you because you don't understand half the shit I'm going to say right now. And I'm like, okay, so here's a napkin, bar napkin drawing with a pen. Can you explain this to me in like 20 minutes? And I get a lot of those every once in a while from him. But yeah, I do think there's a little bit of the old adage, those that do, those that aren't doing, teach. I think that's misrepresenting, but I think there's an expertise in teaching, right? That sometimes doesn't translate into the pursuit of, quote unquote, of refining and pushing the boundaries on the discipline. Frankly, if I'm a researcher, I may not want to teach. If I'm a teacher, I may not want to do research. And I see those being not always mutually exclusive, but they can be. So
I think, here's the thing. I think to be a good teacher, there's one thing that I think for the most part everybody needs. You may be able to get around it if you have a high enough intellect in other areas. But I think one of the biggies is a very strong sense of empathy. And the reason is because you need to be able to quickly identify sort of the kind of learner that this person is, because we all learn differently, but there's some generalities. But to be able to identify, how does this person best want to receive the information, and what's the best way to reach out to this person? And that ends up being an act of empathy, where it's like you're putting yourself in their shoes from their perspective and trying to say, okay, if I'm standing there, what would it take for me to understand what that information is? And then realize that, of course, it isn't necessarily you, because I'm a big thinker, so I understand information best when I get the big picture first, and then we can reason down to the small picture. But there are other people who start from the small. So I say, okay, if I was not a big thinker, but this other kind of thing, but I'm still in their shoes, and it's me, how would I want to hear this, and what's the best way? And a lot of experience goes into that. Just having that level of empathy alone isn't going to cut it. But being able to really put yourself in the shoes of the people you're speaking with, I think is A, very important in communication, and B, extremely important in teaching. And that's not necessarily a skill. That's a skill. So that's why psychologists and philosophers in particular, if you have that skill, might end up being somewhat better at communication. But when you get into science, that empathy isn't necessarily important for science, and people who have strong empathy may not want to go into the sciences. So you end up having people who don't have that level of connection. So,
I do want to just notice something. There's something been happening off screen. Yeah. Nick, when I said, does anybody want to come in and discuss the Babylonian Talmud? Crickets. Right? Crickets. I said, come on, let's talk some shit to Nick. That's exactly what I said in the text. All of a sudden we have like, oh, okay, I'm coming over. So it seems the impetus is talking shit to you.
Yeah,
versus discussing the Babylonian Talmud.
We could sit here and have an intellectual discussion.
You attempts to join right now.
We could sit here, have an intellectual discussion. We could all become better people and learn more, or we could just shit on Nick all evening and just shit on Nick numbers. Yeah. Oh, Jill, and then let's see, Maya. What if you're just bad at explaining things? Yeah. Well, I love Daryl. I photo DNA. Yeah. Well, you know what? We all have our limitations. I certainly have plenty of things I'm extraordinarily bad at, but if you're just bad at it, go find another field. I think, don't teach, or work hard to overcome it. I do think. Like I said, you can learn to spot these things and learn to spot by tells and how a student talks and all of these other things. And it's a skill that can be learned, but I think it's easiest and quickest if you're if you're able to intuit it. Yeah.
So I had a genetics professor in college, Dr. Carlberg. He's gone now, so I don't feel so bad talking about the dead. He actually wrote one of my letters to grad school, so I did some postgraduate work with him too at Cal State Long Beach. But he was a geneticist, taught upper division genetics and bacterial cell physiology and a bunch of. But in the classroom, he was kind of a train wreck. I mean, he came in, spouted a bunch of shit you had to learn, and then kind of walked out of the classroom. And you're like in a 400 level class going, what the fuck did we just do? But if you could grab him for a cup of coffee, or in lab class when he would walk in and the graduate student teaching lab class, you know, or PhD candidates, but they weren't candidates at that institution, were teaching class, he'd come in and then you could ask him questions, and all of a sudden he'd do a 30-minute impromptu session that wasn't in the classroom where he had 60 students or 40 students or whatever. It was great. And he ended up being one of my favorite professors. But I think I took my first class from him was general cellular physiology, right? I think it was like a 300 level class. I'm like, I hate this guy. I've never taken another class with him again. And then I'm realizing, oh my God, he teaches upper division bacterial cell physiology and genetics. And those are both things in my particular microbiology degree that I had to have. But by the end of it, he was one of my favorite professors, because you just realized there was so much shit in there that like you could just tangent him like this. You go, Dr. Kallenbauer, I read this article you posted about the Golgi apparatus and some recent discoveries, and he would do a 30-minute off the cuff. Well, yeah, we've recently determined this, and this, and blah, 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 you know, start citing people, and you're frantically taking notes, and none of it appeared on the test. So you got to realize that if you just asked him what's going to be on the test, he'd tell you, and then the rest of the class is like, and then I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about this, and it was awesome. But he was one of my favorite people. And interestingly enough, he was a technical advisor on ET. That was kind of one of his famous moments. He set up the lab and did all that for them.
Oh,
so
nice.
Actually,
nice.
Yeah.
All right, Oz, welcome.
Great.
What's up, everybody?
Nothing. I noticed. So I sent him the link early and it doesn't show up. Then Pat calls him up and says, "Hey, we're gonna troll Nick." He's like, "I'll be there in 2 seconds flat." Oh, son of a bitch. Yeah. Good to see you, Oz. How are you?
Well, I'm sorry you had to figure out my motives in that manner, but I'm here. I'm here.
I keep trying to have my buddy Sid call into your show, but you don't take Sid's calls anymore. He's hurt. He's really hurt. Sid, had a good time last time he called in.
Yeah, Sid. He's a. It makes sense that he's your friend. Let's just say that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
How are you, Nick?
I'm doing good. Been busy as all hell. I keep saying I want to catch up with you, and then I'm sitting there going like, you're actually busier than I am, which is an achievement. So, I know you're just, oh my God, I don't know how you do all that shit, but yeah, no, I'm doing good.
Good to hear.
So let's see, Sinister Porpoise, $5, studying for my pre-calc test. Hi, people. No, I don't go back to get a bachelor's degree just because I wanted one. Yeah. Yeah, so, all right. Well, thank you, Sinister, for your support and for the super chat. We really appreciate it. So thank you. Yeah. So we were just talking about. Pat's getting his PhD. Jim, I remember when Jim told me he was going to get his PhD, and the first thought crossed my mind that seems to cross Pat's, which was, it's like you're getting up there. What are you going to do with a PhD once you get it? But Jim is kicking ass with his PhD. Pat's going to come to get his, and I'm like, wow, I really am thinking like maybe I should go back and get mine, but it would still be just ego. But yeah,
is Jim's really a PhD though?
Yeah, it's really a PhD.
Yeah.
He's Dr. Jim. He's absolutely Dr. Jim.
Well, I mean, I've been told, and I've been trying to enlighten this conversation a little bit. I was told that he got his quote-unquote PhD from the same organization that titled Kent Hovind a PhD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not. If Jim comes, I'm leaving. Just because I'm like, I don't want to. I'll watch. I'm going to make some popcorn. I'm going to bow out. I'm like, okay, there's no mods. The two of you have had it. Wow. Ouch. Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
Well, no.
Jim did get his PhD from a religious institution. It's actually kind of an interesting discussion. The last couple of years that he was an atheist, he had to kind of hide it. And it might be interesting talk about a show being someone who initially started his master's work as someone who was a theist and then coming out of religion, but you're already in a PhD program at a religious institution, and having to hide your atheism, I think would be an interesting show at some point.
That would
yeah,
be.
I didn't know that. Oh.
I mean, I'd like to try to get Daniel Dennett on. I actually, my aunt is the head of the computer science department at Tufts University. So, I have an in at Tufts, and I've taken kind of a stab at trying to get Daniel Dennett on. But one of the reasons I want to do that is he does the Clergy Project, which is how to help clergymen get out of, clergymen who no longer believe, get out of the clergy, get out of that rat race. And his research, I think he said that he believed as much as 70% of bishops are actually atheist. So once you get to that high level, the higher level you get, the more that do not believe in a higher power. And it's and most of it starts in seminary, where they're thinking seminary is going to be one thing, and when they start learning all of this stuff, like, this doesn't make any sense. This can't be real. And so there's this don't ask, don't tell going on, where like a lot of them are starting to realize maybe a lot of people here don't believe, but we'll all just pretend we do and just keep going. So I'd be curious to know what Jim's experience with that is. But yeah, we should have a show definitely on that topic, and I'd love to talk with Jim about that more. I think that's yeah.
Yeah, I would love to have
Oz
a conversation with him.
I think Oz's story is not dissimilar. He was becoming a lay minister, right, Oz? As you got deeper and deeper, that's kind of as you started studying, and more, like, for me, it was youth pastoring, right? It was like, wait a minute, that sounds like some bullshit. And, I think Oz has a similar experience. The more you start studying it, the more you start realizing there's a lot of holes in theology.
Yeah, I definitely was not in pursuit of a PhD, but was very much in pursuit of, or had the goal of, being some type of, pastor, minister, or whatnot. And yeah, once I've been working a lot on my, obviously we do our tank stuff, in my little bit of spare time that I have, I've been working on my music again, and I was writing the other night, and it kind of hit me. It was, lyrics for a song, but I'm going to use it now, just even in like quotation, whatever. But it was the moment where I took that book, the Bible, off of the religious bookshelf and moved it over to the real life bookshelf. It's having using critical thinking and skepticism, and putting on the, for me anyway, the real life bookshelf, that really fucked up my quote unquote world at that point, because Pat, like you said, it was like, now I'm sniffing and smelling a little bit of bullshit, and that's when it all started to crumble.
Well, I think I've, I don't know, I'm people have tired of hearing this story, but mine was, my mom was Lutheran. She married my dad. She converted to Greek Orthodox for like 2 weeks, just to get married. So, I was raised in this household where, my dad's Greek Orthodox and my grandfather's Jewish, my grandmother's Greek Orthodox, my mom's Lutheran. And we all got along. And it wasn't though, but I went to a Lutheran summer seminary for, basically you're thinking about becoming a youth pastor. And I hadn't read too much of Luther. And then I read Luther. And the second book I've read of Luther was The Jews and Their Lies. And that was it. I was done. I was done with religion. So, I'd read the Catechism and other things, Luther's Small Catechism, but I don't consider that one of Luther's works. And I brought it home. My mom's like, why'd you quit church? Because my mom was a spiritual person, right? Like, church is good. And I handed her a copy in English and said, read this. She read it and she never went back to church. She started going to like a Lutheran church, I should say. She went back to a very non-denominational church because she said, I can't support a church that hates Jewish people. And people go, well, but that's not the Lutheran church. I'm like, yeah, but the guy who founded it hated Jews. So you might not want to have his name on your church. It'd be like I said, if your church is the Hitler Youth Church, would you keep that name? And they go, no, obviously not. I'm like, well, Luther hated Jews and preached a lot of anti-Semitism. So you put his name on your church. Oh, but that's our denomination. Yeah, your denomination is founded by an anti-Semite. So keep it if you want, but you're the anti-Semite church. And they don't like it. But it's factual. It's historical. Luther was an anti-Semite.
Yeah, it's things like that, or to go way more elementary with it. In my opinion, Apostle Mike and I we talked for about an hour last night, and what to go back to Christopher Hitchens, religion poisons everything, whether you buy into that or not. There's at least an element of truth to that, because it is the normalization of absurdity, right? And so what you just shared, Pat, is dead on. And then even something as seemingly minuscule or minor, really in the grand scheme of things, it's not. For me, growing up in a charismatic evangelical church, I was taught from the time I can remember, like my earliest memories, that talking snakes and donkeys and burning bushes that talk, like, that's normal. Oz, that's normal. Like,
that's Tuesday.
That stuff's okay. It's that through the indoctrination and I call it programming and downloading, they normalize those things at a young age, in youth and even going to teenage years, to then all of a sudden you're an adult and you still read about talking animals and burning bushes, and you don't question it because it's become normalized. And that's where it's dangerous, is it becomes so programmed that you don't even stop to think, is this rational? Like, is this logical that I believe in a book written thousands of years ago that talks about shit, fucking animals talking and bushes talking, like, just at a very elementary level? And I think that, it gives you a picture of why it can be so dangerous, in my very humble opinion.
Sorry. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
No, I agree. Yeah. And I think, no. I think that's, in Oz, that's very astute. I mean, I don't think people realize that, there's so much luggage in so many of these religious movements that people just want to gloss over. And, they want to, I'm all for, take the hits when you make them, but you got to acknowledge your misses. And that's, if you're not willing to acknowledge your misses, you're disingenuous to the point of being a fraud, right? That's really where I look at it. Like, hey, I made 12 prophecies today. I'm going to become a prophetic person, and I have 3 hits and 9 misses. Well, shit, that's a 25% success rate, Pat. That pretty much sucks. Like, if I was playing for a major league team and, I was only throwing 3 strikes for every 9 pitches every 12 pitches that I threw, I wouldn't have my job very long, right? Batting averages are a little different, but, we can joke about hits and misses, but, religion never counts their misses. They only count their hits.
And the other thing, I mean, it seems to me to be a bit of the boiled frog syndrome, right? Which is that, by the time you get to the by the time you realize just how bizarre the Bible is, with the flood, living inside a whale for 40 days, the whole 9 yards, you've already bought all the little bits. So the parents don't start out with this, and they tell this to children who are already kind of malleable. But if they waited till you were 18 years old, and then just dropped the entire Bible on you and said, this is the story, this is real life, read it and you'll understand everything, that would be very different than if just bit by bit, as you're growing older, they're teaching you little bits, and every time it's just a little bit of a step further. It's never a bridge too far, because that's the boiled frog. You put the frog in hot water, it'll jump out right away. You put the frog in cold water and raise the temperature slowly, frog never notices until it's boiled. Oh, God, Pat's going to give me
Okay, stop using that analogy.
Okay.
So scientifically, that experiment doesn't work.
Oh, it doesn't work.
The whole boiling frog thing is a urban legend. You put a bunch of frogs in a pot, change the temperature, and if they can actually escape, they will. So they seek, thermal equilibrium with their surroundings. So they're like lizards. The only reason a frog won't leave a boiling pot of water is because they can't fucking escape. So in an environment where they can escape temperature, they will. So stop using that analogy because it's false. It's not scientifically sound.
Give me a better one. Analogies aren't necessarily supposed to be perfect. They're supposed to. Have you ever heard of stories? Have you heard of myths? Metaphor. It's a metaphor. Do you know what a metaphor is?
I know what a metaphor is, but metaphors have to have some cultural milieu that's accurate, right? And it's highly inaccurate. It's based on a false reporting of, right?
All right. Well, let's welcome Jim. Let's welcome Jim, and then we'll tell Pat why he's wrong. But first, let's welcome Jim. Jim, how are you?
What's up, Jim?
Hey, what's going on, man? Hey, Oz. Holy crap. Let's see. Maybe this is I've been having microphone issues all night. Is this good?
Yeah, we hear you. We're good.
Sounds good.
Okay. I think I have a better metaphor than the boiling frog. I didn't know that was an urban myth, but that's good to know. How about the domestic abuse victim that thinks it's going to constantly get better and hangs on, stays in the house, stays into the relationship, even though the abuse gets worse and worse and worse, hoping that it's going to get better someday?
Bingo.
I'm not a fan of that analogy, only because I think it does work in a number of instances. But the reason, I think for my point is for the people who don't even realize that they're in the abusive relationship, they're not hoping it gets better because they don't realize it's wrong. They've gotten so inculcated into the normalcy of it.
Yeah, the psychology of victimization is very. That's my old job. Is again, until you've talked to specialists, abuse is a growing. No one usually starts off wanting to be abused, but you have some predispositions psychologically where abuse seems to be the norm, and then through abusive relationships, that norm increases, and what you will be willing to accept within the cycle of violence becomes what to the outside world is extreme. To you becomes your normal operating level. So I would just kind of that analogy, right? But I get what you mean.
Yeah, it's almost like the boiling frog
I would stay away from that one.
Which is a better analogy, whether it's right or not. Yes, Oz, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say, I think what Jim said, then Pat's follow-up actually furthers that being a solid analogy, because like most believers, me being a former believer, and most former believers that I talk to now, they didn't realize the mess they were caught up in. They didn't realize the manipulation, the lying, and the whether it was verbal or emotional abuse or gaslighting. They didn't even realize it until later on. So I do think it sucks. It fucking sucks. Nobody wants to, talk about abuse or use abuse as an analogy, but I do think it's solid. I won't say it's the best, but I think it's a solid analogy to the relationship people have with God, church, especially here in America.
Oh, I definitely think there's a lot of abusive elements. There's also aside from, and we've all heard too. I mean, I think sort of the churches that are there are a lot of people who don't go to church that often and who don't really seem to care about it. And I still think there are issues with that. But then there are the people who go all the time. And then instead of when they're having trouble with their marriage, who do they talk to? They talk to the minister. They don't talk to a professional. They talk to their minister, ostensibly a virgin who doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. And the virgin will usually blame the woman in one way or another because, well, that's what the Bible says. It's really pretty much always the woman's fault in one way or another. She's not giving her man what he needs and all of this other stuff. And I think we've all heard stories of that, and maybe even met people who have gone through that kind of thing. And it can get even far worse. But that's where it's like oh Jesus, it can be an extraordinarily abusive system. Any system that seeks to control, I think, is going to be abusive. But when you get to that level, it's and they don't see it, and people are just sitting there going, "Oh, I guess you're right. I guess really it's all my fault because I'm not doing what what my husband needs, which is for me to look at him the way Jesus looks at God." I mean, and the number of people who believe that shit's a lot higher than you'd think, especially in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nick, I'm going to jump off here, and then I just got home. I'm going to get back on here on my computer in a second.
All right. Cool. See you in a bit. Yeah, I've heard stories from Seventh-day Adventists, Mormons, and Pentecostals, and especially at the high ends, where it's just sort of like, if the wife ends up being raped, it's sort of like, well, it's not really rape because the husband needs it, and your job is to support the husband, and yada yada yada, and it's or that you cannot possibly rape your wife, or all this other stuff. And it's like, this is what the ministers tell people. Again, not all of them, and not in all cases, but I've heard that. I've heard that enough that I can say I've heard that more than a few times in my course.
Why single out 7-day Adventists, Mormons, and others? Is it because it's not accepted within mainstream Catholicism today? But I will tell you, as someone who just wrote a book on it, this was, in the early Christian church, particularly following St. Augustine's Confessions, this is the standard practice within Christianity for the next millennia. So the fact that women are secondary and a patriarchal system within Christianity develops, let's not just, shit on Catholics, but for a long time it was the Catholic, and then later, after the Great Schism, the Orthodox Church, the Eastern and Western churches, for simpler terminology, that it was generally accepted that, women were secondary in their roles to men, just largely as a matter of theology. Women, Augustine was very clear, women are to support their husband and endure whatever violence comes their way within a Christian marriage, right? If your husband's a Christian, you take the abuse, because divorce is a greater sin than the violence being placed upon you, right? These are the same people who are going to push the doctrine from the pastorals, right? 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus, that women's jobs, that a man can seek, salvation differently than a woman. A woman, in addition to all the other bullshit, she's got to bear children and be obedient to her husband to receive out salvation, right? So, a 2nd century, pseudo-epigraphic text is laid into Christianity, becomes a foundational view among many Christians, and again, the early church. That this is just the way it works. Yeah. Any modern Christian who reads the pastorals is reading falsely ascribed. Jim made a perfect point. Like I go into my book, if you're a modern Christian, whether or not you believe in God or not, you should tear the pastorals out of your Bible, because they are demonstrably false. They're forgeries. Now it's not a case, again, I'm not going to teach textual criticism, because that's not, I do it, but it's not what I'm going to do tonight, because I'm half in the bag. But the issue is, if something is a text like Hebrews, which had no name to it, and then someone says, oh, this person wrote it. For a long time it was believed Paul wrote Hebrews. Scholarship has pushed back against that, and it's largely ascribed as being an unknown, anonymous text, right? So as long as it's anonymous, we'll leave it in the world of anonymous, right? Anonymous authorship. The pastorals are different. They're purposely designed to appear to be Pauline when they're not. The author purposely reports themselves to be Paul when they're not. They're forgeries. They're not misattributions. Bart Ehrman and some other scholars do some really good work on this. This is no different than me writing a letter in your name, Nick, and assigning my name to it. It's a forgery. By modern standards, I'd be convicted for committing a crime. But Christians keep them within their doctrinal view, because the pastorals are about church organization. They're all 2nd century texts, by the way. These are at least, again, they're supposed to be written by Paul. They're at least 80 years removed from Paul in most cases, maybe 70 if you want to be generous. So this is at least 2-3 generations after Paul that these forgers are writing. Well, let's channel Paul, write some false treatises on church doctrine so we can get our way. And one of those is the suppression of women, because in some sects of Christianity, women were very popular. They're charismatic leaders of churches. So that's it. That's my rant for tonight. And read my book.
Not sure if Jim was trying to say something was muted, or if he was just.
No, I muted myself. That was spot on. I can't add to that. There is a great series by Kenneth Humphreys. Jesus Never Existed. I am not a Jesus mythicist, but I've talked to Ken. We've had this out, and his stuff is so cogent. If you go check out Kenneth Humphreys, and he's got a series that just is devoted to the pastorals in particular, but all 6 or more, there's probably more than 6 inauthentic Pauline epistles, and why they are, and there's so many ways that you can call something fake. And they say it in such subtle terms. They don't come out and say it was fake, it's forged. They don't use the word forged, but that's what it is.
I'll be honest. I was surprised when Bart Ehrman used the word forged and wrote a couple serious academic articles challenging academics to stop using the word pseudo, or the prefixes pseudo and deutero and all these, and say, look, let's just call them what they are. They're forged. Now, like anonymous text should remain anonymous, right? Like the Gospels and Hebrews, for example. But any of the falsely attributed books that claim apostolic succession and authority should be claimed as forgeries, and there should be a big red "This document is a forgery" at the top of it before you read it. And the pastorals, the Pauline epistles, 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus, are some of the most damaging, socially damaging texts of the period that they were generated in. They denounced women in leadership roles, right? And if you look at the genuine Pauline epistles, right, and you start comparing them internally to externally to the now known forgeries, you have a complete changing of Paul. Like, was Paul a historical personage? Absolutely. Was Jesus? I think he was. There's a lot of caveats in that. I'm a mythicized. Sorry, man. I should not have drank. I'm a mythicized Jesus. I'm not a Jesus. I'm not a mythicist. I think Jesus is a mythicized historical personages, right? I think he could be 1 or 2 different people, maybe 3 that were conflated. We have a lot of popular messianic figures from the 1st century and end of the 1st century BCE that Jesus can be conflated with. And whether or not Jesus existed wholly as a single entity or was conflated, I think there's some good argumentation in that. Yeah, exactly. Carrier has some good analysis of this as well. But I'm not a mythicist. I think the mythicist hurdle is pretty high. I think it's a hard hurdle to jump over. But regardless, Christianity is a reality in the 1st century BCE. So, in AD. So whatever came out of the 1st century BCE as a messianic Jewish movement found someone to latch a name to, or 1 or more people, that ends up being Jesus, right, or the Christos, right? And I think that's a part of the reason they're so important in the 1st century to reconcile. Is it Jesus Christ? Is it Jesus, or is it Christ? Because we see so much alteration of texts in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century to everywhere it says Jesus, add Christ. Everywhere it says Christ, add Jesus, because you want to make sure they're the same person, because people had different views. You had dualists, you had non-son of God deists, basically messianic Jews who believe Jesus was a Messiah, but it was the Son of God, as in the same way Moses was the Son of God, right? That he's a prophetic human figure. And then you had people that believe that Jesus was an actual divine entity. Then you had divisions, and even within that group, well, was he the Son of God, which makes him in the Greek concept, a demigod, half human, half divine, or was he fully God, like all on his own, or was he part of God himself? And you don't get the whole Trinitarian thing until the 4th century, late 3rd, 4th century. And by that time, you've mixed so much middle and Neoplatonic bullshit into it that you're not even talking Christianity anymore. You're talking Greek philosophy and Plato's concept of forms and all this shit that had emerged in the next 6 centuries. So I'm done. My rant's over, and I'm going to get another alcoholic beverage.
I did want to point out, for me, when we get into this whole idea that women are inferior, and I've argued that with so many Christians on so many fronts, so many times, it's utterly insane. But the one argument that they end up falling back on universally, and is the one argument I despise because it is so cynical, and it's like, how you don't get what this argument is when they say no, women are equal, first of all, because they were made in the image and all this other stuff, so they're both in the image of God. But the Bible also says that the man is to cherish his woman. So because he's cherishing her, they're equal. And I'm like, you can cherish a slave. You know, I mean, you could say, that's my favorite slave that's working the plantation. I cherish that slave is what's keeping it's still a slave. I mean, it's, and so I hear this all the time, that because you're supposed to cherish them and they're supposed to be important, and maybe you're even as a guy supposed to die for them, which I think is referenced once or twice in the Bible, that they're equal. And I was just like, no, equal is how they function in the home, in the family, and in society. And they have to be equal on all three fronts, and they're not equal on any of them.
Well, first of all, it's a very liberal interpretation of Genesis 1 and 2 through 3, right?
Yeah.
Depending on which creation myth you want to fall into within the within the Jewish, then later adopted by Christianity worldview. And I hate the word Judeo-Christian because it's bullshit. But the idea that man was created as a helper. Woman was created as a helpmate for man.
Yeah.
The helper is subservient from the beginning. Created from the rib, so they're not above or below. No, but created as a helpmate, right?
Yeah, I have created you a helper.
If I tell you, hey,
God says, I've created you a helper. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, dear Lord.
The other issue is that I'm gonna defend Paul. The first century Pauline Christianity, as we can look at the authentic letters of Paul, was fairly egalitarian. I'm not going to say there wasn't cultural biases present within Paul's works, but Paul seems to be, because Paul's an apocalypticist. The world's coming to an end. He's going to see the second coming, or the return of Jesus, the establishment of the kingdom, however you want to interpret that. I mean, I'm not going to get in the argumentation, but Paul thinks he's going to see Jesus' return. Paul's okay with women leading churches. He says several times in those authentic letters, particularly Romans, right? Which Romans is the first and only defense of his theology to an outside group. It's the only place in Paul's letters where he defends his theology, because he starts off the letter going, hey, you've heard a lot of shit about me. Let me tell you what I believe. It's the only place where he creates his own exegesis on doctrine, right? So when you look at Romans, Paul's about women and acknowledges women in leadership positions within the church. Doesn't say they shouldn't be leaders. He acknowledges them in their role, and whether or not Junia is an apostle, we can get into that argument. I believe she is. But this is the important thing, is that Paul himself presents a very egalitarian view, because the immediate return of Jesus within his lifetime is something he's waiting for. So he's not worried about a long-term socially adjusted church. It isn't until the second century, in the late first and into the second century, when Christians are sitting around going, hey, Jesus hasn't come back. We have this institution now, and we're growing and we're converting people. But Greeks and Romans and even Jews don't like this idea of women being their equal anymore, because it's okay to be equals when Jesus is coming tomorrow. But when we're going to live and die within this religion, we want our socially normative role as men to be perpetuated through the theology, and then you get the suppression of women. There's an excellent book coming out in February of 2022 called Betrayed: The Orthodox Subjugation of Women in the Early Christian Church by, me, which I think you guys will really enjoy. But I take a lot of time to go through and look at this, and look at the anthropological and then historical, what's going on. I hated Paul for a long time. This book, I did a lot of remediation on Paul. I think Paul is largely misunderstood as a misogynist in history, because you look at books like the pastorals, and Paul, if you believe Paul wrote them, Paul's an asshole. But Paul didn't write them. Paul writes in very affirming tones, and when you take out the corruptions of 1 Corinthians, where people add some of Timothy into 1 Corinthians, you get a very different Paul. Paul that's about, yes, there's social and gender norms that were pervasive even in Judaism and Hellenistic society, but Paul himself is less a misogynist than he gets represented in history for the most part. And that's it. I'm done pontificating, and I'm going to go around to the beer. I'll be back in a minute.
I was going to ask him a question about Corinthians, but I'll wait till he gets back. No, go get a drink. You're actually muted too. You're still muted, but which is kind of the way I prefer to have you on, to be quite honest. But go get a drink. I'll say my question.
I'll be back in a minute.
I know what my question is. I'll remember it. Yeah, okay. So Oh, okay. So, Jim, if you came back for all the apocalyptic China is going to murder all of us, I'm so sorry. We're having a very different conversation today.
I am enjoying this one immensely more than last one.
Yeah,
That one scared the socks off of me, to be honest with you.
Well, I had seen a really good, and it was because I was trying to find a way to codify where sort of we had landed, because we were talking about a lot of stuff, but I want to make sure we kind of landed in a place that we understood it. And I mean, for me, it was just, look, it's not like they've built anything new that's going to completely destroy us or this or that. But the problem is, it's a new arms race, and we're back to the arms race. I mean, that's really where we are now, because they've changed the model by having a first strike weapon. So it's not that tomorrow everything's going to end, but it's a real problem in that sense. And the guy I saw, I should actually link it. I should find it. I forget his name. He's actually, I think it's the Fifth Column guy, but he's reasonably famous, big YouTube channel. And one of the things he had said was, look, we're going to have this new arms race now, and what we're going to do is we're going to spend so much more money trying to keep up with the Chinese as everyone tries to develop a faster weapon that can go faster, and violate all the. And so here's the question. Why is it that when we say we need money to create more hospitals, to help the homeless, to solve all of these problems, we don't really ever seem to have quite enough money in the budget to do that? But when we want to compete with the Chinese, when it actually, in some ways, doesn't matter, we currently still have a deterrent that's effective. We can't, they're not going to be able to eliminate us without getting eliminated themselves. So we're locked into this reactionary state where we're going to engage in another arms race. And guess what? Somehow we're going to have the money for that. That's why do I think we're going to have the money and all the government spending on military for that?
My brother and I have this debate constantly. He's an educator. He lives in Dubai. He used to live in China. He's an international school teacher. Teaches everything. I mean, athletics to film, right? And he opened my eyes. Of course, being career military, at first I was like, we need a strong defense, and that was a long time ago. I have totally changed my tune on that. Since then, I have found out that United States spends the same amount of money as the next 25 powerful countries on military and arms and weapons. And 24 of those 25 are our allies. And yes, Nick, you're right. There may be an arms race, and we need to get on top of that. Even if we needed to get on top of that with upgrading maybe our nuclear silos, who knows, or whatever, and our UAVs, that's huge now. Drones are everything. The military is becoming automated. Many of the jobs in the military when I was active duty are now civilianized and becoming automated. 25 times, our spending more than the top 25 other countries. If I hate to parrot Bernie Sanders here, but if we want more money for infrastructure, for social projects, and for education, there's your money right there. Tap into that. We don't need as big a military. We're almost 2 million strong, active duty, not including reservists. It's unnecessary.
Well, we've got military bases in Germany, and I understand why. But and that one actually is because that's a hub, and especially a medical hub. But we have military bases. We have 187 military bases that are foreign military bases. 95% of all of the military bases on the planet that are foreign military bases, that is a military base that's owned by a country other than where that military base resides. Actually, it's between 90 and 95%, I forget the exact number, is owned by our U.S. bases. So we have military bases all over the world, plenty of places we really don't need them. We're spending all this money, and we're a part of NATO. So the reality is, when you just take into account, there was the other thing, that the largest air force on the planet is the U.S. Air Force. The second largest air force on the planet is the U.S. Navy. So we have the largest and second largest air forces on the planet.
Are you sure that's right, Nicholas? Because I think Israel's got a bigger air force than us.
I'd be surprised if they have a bigger air force than us. But that's a figure from way back, so it may have changed, and some of these figures do change. The other thing is that top 26 or 24, it was within the last 5 years, we actually were spending more than every other country on the planet combined, and that was within the last 5 years. It fluctuates depending on, so more than all of the others combined. And even the top 26, by that point, you're basically almost out of all the industrialized countries. I mean, it's pretty close to all the others combined anyway. I usually say more than all of them combined because it's close enough to accurate, and it's been accurate within a reasonable margin. So, and again, so many of them are
The only other point of contention I would have is you mentioned Germany in your list. That would be, Ramstein and Stuttgart and some of the others. Those are the ones we kind of still need. There are so many more we don't need.
I said that when I corrected myself. The German one we need it.
I was, that's a hub because I was part of Marine Forces Africa and Marine Forces Europe. Where's the headquarters of Marine Forces Europe and Germany. Marine Forces Africa? Stuttgart, Germany. I was stationed there for 3 years. I've been to 43 countries, and most of those we don't belong in, we don't need to be in. We're there. I almost think it's kind of a manifest destiny thing. We just need a show of force, a presence. Is that really necessary? There are actual naval flotillas that go around. It's called, I forget the name. There's a certain float. It happens twice a year, and it starts in Pascagoula, Mississippi. It goes through the canal. It goes around South America. It goes back through the canal. It goes up to San Diego. It's just a show of force. A whole fleet will just go and, hi, how you doing? And it's great for the sailors and Marines because we get drunk in Bogota and Cartagena and Manta, Ecuador. It's fun, but it's such a waste of money.
Well, and I think you're right. I think we've decided that we have to have dominance in every part of the planet basically at all times, except for the very small areas where obviously we can't, like Russia, China, and specifically those areas. But everywhere else that we can, we do it. And the problem is, it's sort of like, it's very expensive. We certainly don't seem to need it most of the time, and we're spending all of this money. We're spending all of this money to maintain it when ostensibly we have a military so strong, and hopefully we have a military so strong. I think this is the point: is that we don't have to watch and dominate the entire planet. We can be strong enough that if suddenly we have to go or be somewhere, we can go and be in those places. And that requires some military bases in places like Germany. We have to keep Qatar. We have to keep places like that because we need to be able to project there at some point. But we don't need to have 187 foreign military bases. And
what about this, Nick? Also, this is a sticking point. Like Saudi Arabia, we don't see eye to eye. The only reason we keep good terms with them is because we want to keep our base there because of Yemen and UAE and whatnot. But conflict of interest. We sacrifice so much on our diplomatic relations. We try to keep diplomatic relations sometimes, and it would hurt the oil. I didn't even mention the oil, but
that's the big reason. That's bigger than the base. Yeah, but please continue.
Definitely. Yeah, we as a country should be denouncing that part of the world, and we're making nice with them sometimes just so we can keep a base and keep the oil flow, and that's a conflict.
And to be honest, if we don't want to denounce them, that's fine. But then let's not say that we denounce terrorists and dictatorial regimes. We don't. If we want to be honest about who we are and then say we're the kind of country that really is going to make a deal with the devil, if we need to survive, then let's at least say that so we know who we're looking at when we look in the mirror. But instead, we run around saying, well, Saddam Hussein is a dictator and this country does not abide dictators as long as, let's not mention Saudi Arabia and the fact that we give them weapons, planes, the whole 9 yards. And the Royal House of Saud, I mean, it was, if I recall, it was the Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney, under the first Bush's presidency, who was, I think we had arms deals before, but negotiated one of the biggest arms deals we had ever done with Saudi Arabia. They needed these weapons because the Royal House of Saud was going to get overthrown by their own people who were constantly trying to rebel because this is a murderous dictatorial regime. They needed guns and weapons to maintain power. We said, here you go, and we sold them to them. We sold them to them with quite some profit for ourselves, but we also sold them with a wink and a nod to the fact that they were going to use OPEC veto power favorably towards us. And because you only need one country that's got veto power to veto raises in oil prices for another country. The entire economic boom of the 90s, which Clinton gets credit for, he gets all credit for this, wasn't him, but for the most part. It was his predecessor, and it was his predecessor selling these weapons to the Royal House of Saud, who would then veto major price hikes against the U.S. And they would let just enough come through that they had some plausible deniability. But we have the cheapest oil of anywhere in the fucking world, and it's because of that deal. That's another reason why we went into Iraq, was because we were under the impression that Royal House of Saud was going to fail within the next 5 years. It didn't, but it's still always kind of teetering. And we said, if they fail, we need somebody who's got OPEC veto power, and presumably it was going to be Iraq. Now, Iraq's pissed at us for obviously very good reasons, and that whole thing's just been one hell of a clusterfuck, and we just wiped it out. But that's the Royal House of Saud is a tyrannical regime. They're brutal, they're dictators, and we absolutely support their asses and blacked them out, redacted their involvement in 9/11. And it wasn't the Royal House of Saud that was involved in 9/11, it was their civilians. And here's a question. If all but one of the 9/11 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia, do you think that tells you anything about how they feel about us and why? Because they know where those guns came from. They know who sold the weapons to these dictators that we never support. So, yeah, it's. I mean, I hate to use the phrase, but, the chicken's coming home to roost kind of thing. I mean, that was...
You're preaching the truth. I want to give Pat a chance to talk. Nick, I have to bounce. I have another scheduled appearance. What? But I will say this.
Thank you so much for coming.
I will say this. My second and last tour in Iraq, I was a company ops chief. I was the company first sergeant. 168 Marines sitting down, listening to me after we got the logistics sorted out. We're about to board the plane. We're about to go. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We'd already landed. We were there. We were on a tarmac in Kuwait. I said, you know what, guys? All right, listen up. Unpopular opinion time. We are here under false pretenses. I don't think we should be here. 𝐒𝐤𝐜𝐿, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, is strong and powerful because of our presence. If we left, we would be doing more good than being here. Let's do our job, watch each other's back, do what we were assigned to do as the warriors we are. And that did not go over well, especially with my captain, my major, my battalion commander. But, I'm telling the truth.
Do you know? And just as a pointer, one of Osama bin Laden hated not more than anybody, but one of the groups that he hated the most was the United States. About as much as the United States that he hated Saddam Hussein, because Saddam Hussein was actually very liberal compared to just about any other country out there. And as a horrible human being as he was, well, he didn't believe in a Sharia caliphate. He sure as hell wasn't going to follow. And so if Saddam succeeded in toppling us, if bin Laden succeeded in toppling us, his next target would have been Saddam Hussein. So we took an ally who wanted bin Laden dead, not quite as much as us, but yeah, he wanted it. And we're just like, we're going to kill him because he's working with the terror. Holy fuckballs.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I'm going to hang on here. I want to hear what Pat has to say, and then I'll bounce.
Well, I think it's important for, and I'm going to use the term Americans kind of loosely here. I think it's important for Americans to kind of stop, take a breath, and remember the 80s, particularly the later 80s, when we were talking about Iraq as a leader in the Middle East in their war against Iran. I remember that rhetoric. I remember the literally billions of dollars of military aid being poured into Iraq during the Iran-Iraq war. I'm sorry, into Iraq against Iran in the Iran-Iraq war. I remember George Bush talking about how Iraq was going to be this major buttress against Iranian influence in the region. And I remember Iraq and Saudi Arabia being poised against an emergent and forceful Iran. Now, maybe because I'm older, but I didn't forget this shit. It's like, I remember news clips where people like Tom Brokaw and all these people were coming out going, today Iraq resisted Iranian aggression along their border. And we actually watched news clips of Iraqi defenders, military guys, against an emergent and a totalitarian Iran. We forgot all that shit. There's a reason Jim was being shot at with Iraqi ordnance that was purposed for the Iran war when he was in his tour. It was stamped America / Iraq / now against me, right? This is the reality. Most of the shit shot at us was our shit.
Yeah.
And people don't want to admit that.
Firefight I've been in, it was against AK-47s. I don't know high level, theater level politics, but if they funded them with weapons that we don't even use ourselves, but that may or may not be true. I don't know.
In Afghanistan, at least, I don't know about other places, but in Afghanistan, when the Mujahideen, oh dear Lord, I'm going to try. We're fighting
Mujahideen, freedom fighters.
Thank you. When they were fighting the Soviets, we supplied them with the weapons they needed to they were going to get wiped out without the weapons we supplied. However, we knew we couldn't supply them with American weapons because that could get traced back to us. So we had to get AK-47s and all of these other weapons through third parties, but we supplied them. They were ours. We paid for it. They got them on our dime, so that and then those were the weapons that we were being shot at by. Those AK-47s weren't manufactured in the U.S., but they were purchased by the U.S. and given to them.
And guess what the Taliban has now? A whole cache of brand spanking new U.S. shit.
Including an airbase with a
Fuck.
pool. They've got the Olympic pool, right? That Olympic pool that we saw the pictures of, and we're like, this is what we built. The Taliban has an Olympic pool now. Oh, for fuck's sake.
Oh, geez. Oh, I got to bounce, guys.
You.
Great
Good to
talking
see
to you again.
Good to see
And
you,
Nice talking to you, Jim.
just give me a skosh more notice next time, Nicholas, and then I will commit to these. Okay.
It's every Friday at 10, but I will try to remind you of the day before. And I got.
Wait, before I leave, guess what? No, you are absolutely correct, sir. Because look, on my list Friday, because I put on my list for November 12th. I put it on my list. That's the next time that I can actually come and commit to this. November 12th is a Friday, so I will be there then. Okay, I'll talk to you all later.
We got to figure out who's the one.
All right, nice talking to you, man.
The last name, the last one from Atheist Edge who hasn't been on, but between you and Courtney, it's like we've had like most of Atheist Edge on. We've got to round it out, but we'll sort
No,
that
there's
out.
only her and I now, and really it's not her. She just got married. She's still working her master's in psychology, so yeah, she's not even really a part. It's just basically me now until she can get back in the groove.
Yep. Well, no, I know that she was on in time,
All
and
right.
it was just like she had to work. Okay.
Yep.
Catch you later. Bye. Oh, wow. And we lost Xander. I think he's just, he probably is. I mean, he's on the road. He can't like on and off the whole shit. But so So did you have any other comments? I still remember my question. It's not vital. It's back a topic. But what are your thoughts on this is the shit. And to tell you the truth, I mean, at the time that we're doing it, the problem is, I don't think these were necessarily bad ideas. Yeah, I don't think supplying rebels fighting the Soviet Union was a bad idea, and I think in part of the reason that they had their ultimate collapse was trying to compete with us in a number of areas that ultimately they weren't able to. But the problem was we never did any follow-up, right? We're just sort of like, okay, now that they're all dead or the fighting's all started, we're going to bail. We got these weapons in the hands of these fighters who've got nothing left to do with them, and they're going to go on and find somebody else. So do you think we should just not be involved in any of this stuff, or do you think that we should be following through better? What the hell do you... I mean, it's clear... I mean, the number of times we have gotten shot at by our own weapons in history, I don't know what the percentage is, but it sounds like a lot.
Well, I think that's inevitable, to be honest with you. If you get shot at by your own ordnance, I mean, that's just the reality of what it is. But I do think that we need to stop having a 5-year cycle on our news. We need to have a 50-year cycle on our news. And we need to really sit down as Americans and go, okay, why are we here? What have we done to get here? And what has been done before we got here? And I that's the historian in me, right? I wasn't this cynical 30 years ago, but I read newspapers and I watch news and I try to stay engaged. And I've traveled outside the United States, and nothing worse than being confronted. 20 years ago, I'm being confronted in a bar in Italy about American politics and realizing I don't know what they're talking about because I don't have the same news sources they do. And that was pretty enlightening to me. And that's kind of my worldview started shifting a little bit. You had a question for me if you want to throw that out there now, but Oz is on, so Oz sit here and say Jesus is a myth. And then
I wanted to, before we got into World War III on Jesus, I wanted to get in the Corinthians. I swear to God, we'll hit the fact that Jesus is not a myth. We'll get to that in a minute. But the oh, he's prepping. I shouldn't have poked the bear. But Corinthians, there's been a modern argument because for the most part, I say, okay, look, yes, you will find homosexuality as an abomination, all these things in the Old Testament. Anyone who believes in New Covenant theology, you can toss all that out the window. That's how they get away. That's how they say, oh, I can eat shrimp, I can do all those other things, New Covenant theology. So my argument is, well, Jesus never spoke against homosexuality. The counter to that is, well, he never spoke about a lot of things, but you should know, and that's an idiotic argument, but we'll skip that for now. But the next argument I say is, look, there's really no credible source that homosexuality is frowned upon by God in any way whatsoever in the Bible, because once you can get rid of the Old Testament, because that New Covenant theology lets you do that, there's only a few lines in, say, Corinthians. So now the question is, are those lines actually credible? So at a minimum, if it's a forgery and if it's not Paul, then it's not credible. But also, I've heard at least that the interpretation is that what they were actually referring to was not homosexuals, but specifically young male prostitutes, which was a whole different thing. If you studied Greek, the ladder of Eros, there is a whole, oh, for fuck's sake. There is in fact a precedent for understanding that young male prostitutes was actually very much a thing. So was it that whoever the author in Corinthians was saying that it's young male prostitutes that are a problem and you should have adult relationships, and ones that you don't pay for, or was it specifically homosexuality? Do we know? Is there any way to find out? I mean, what do you know about that?
Well, there is, and I guess this is somewhat unpopular, but in the and again, this is all in the context of 1st century BCE, 1st century CE, Palestine, and normative Jewish conduct, societal and religious conduct of the period. Homosexuality was generally denounced. So Jesus, if he existed within the milieu that many of us think he did, other than Jesus is a myth, Oz, but Jesus probably would have been predisposed as being against homosexuality, because homosexuality was largely seen as a Hellenistic activity, right? A Greek or non-Jewish activity. Homosexuality wasn't generally accepted within Judaism at this period in time. It was denounced formally, particularly because of its association with Greek culture. But you're right to say, is there anything definitive within there are some issues with Paul. Paul seems to denounce homosexuality pretty generally, particularly in Romans. Whether or not he's talking about male prostitution or not, he is talking about male-to-male liaisons, which seems to be, whether or not it's immoral or not, seems to be subject to some interpretation. But it's generally, it's an easy theological analysis to reach the conclusion that Jesus and Paul, by extension, Paul, not Jesus, but Jesus, by affirmation of being Jewish of the period and saying he follows the law, generally accepted as Jewish normative behavior, and then Paul's actual denouncement of homosexuality, that Christianity in the 1st century was anti-homosexual.
Okay.
And I think that's a fair theological interpretation. I'm not saying it's necessarily reflective upon the period, but it's reflective upon a certain view of the period.
All right. Well, thank you. That's one I would like to learn a bit more about, and have had some hope that that's a good argument. But I don't know enough about it to know whether
But
that's
was
just
Judaism, particularly pre-Second Temple period Judaism, was it prescriptive against homosexuality? That's a question for scholars out my side. But I know that it's currently been debated quite a bit. It seems that the old adage, Judaism has been against homosexuality from the beginning, may be less conclusive than a lot of people. There may be some nuance in that argument that Judaism itself may have been less prescriptive against homosexuality pre-Second Temple period than has been previously asserted by some scholars.
all right. Perfect. And so
Not my area of expertise, so I'll step out of it.
that's still helpful, and what that tells me is at least that there's a very real chance that the hope that I have that would be that's a tenable argument is diminishing, and so I just so it's worth getting as many perspectives as possible. So, all right, well, so we've had Oz come back, and Oz had made a very good point about Jesus mythicism, because I said I don't really, but he had made this point, which is, so I don't usually, as a matter of course, deny that Jesus existed, but I like what you would say, Jesus, not a Jesus mythicist. You said Jesus myth. What was it that you said, Pat? That you are mythologized, so that maybe
I meant mythologized Jesus, right?
Yeah, which I think I'm probably leaning far towards. I obviously don't. I mean, if I believe that if he performed miracles or was the Son of God or anything, I would not be an atheist. But I've always sort of been of the belief that there was what Hitchens called the mad Jewish preacher running around at the time causing trouble, and then somebody built up a religion around him that has lasted this long. But so Oz, and Oz has some pretty good arguments. I've heard a lot of the standard arguments. I heard Carrier's arguments. We've had him on to discuss them. But Oz had some pretty good arguments about it. But I will say, and I've said this before, so I kind of know where he's going to answer, because we've said this on his air, but this is our air for our audience, so I want to talk to Oz about this, which is, so Oz, you almost seem to take it a bit personally, this Jesus is a myth, and that it's very important to you to get that out. And you've explained to me why it made a lot of sense to me, but I was hoping that you'd be willing to chat about that just a little bit more.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. The thing for me in this part, if we want to say it's anecdotal, maybe possibly, then I'll own that. But as a former believer, I was told that this Jesus character was sent to save my soul and save me from eternal hell, burning, gnashing of teeth, torment, abuse, and all of that. If that's the case, I need, my standards of evidence for Jesus is the same as God. And even what Pat's saying, I respect it, because I think there's a lot of very, very smart people that hold either that position or positions that are like that. But to me, when I hear, maybe it was 2 or 3 people combined into one, that's still a myth, because we're not talking about one person. We're still talking about a combination of characters or peoples that made up one mythological person, right? So even in that, as much as I respect it, and I respect the hell out of Pat, no questions asked. But even when I hear that, to me, what I'm hearing is, okay, I get it. I understand exactly what you're saying. But to me, when I hear that, my perspective is my reality. And my perspective on that is, we're still talking about a myth, because we're taking multiple people, like I said, not to beat a dead horse, but we're taking multiple people in creating this narrative. So we don't even know if there was a real Jesus. We just know there's people we combined together and mashed them together like some potatoes and made this story out of it.
So potato Jesus is yeah, okay. So let me. You had made another point that you touched on here, which I think is interesting, which is to go a step further than that. Let's assume for a second that there was a single person named Jesus that is who the stories are based on, but he's got none of the magical powers. Probably didn't do half of even the non-magical stuff. And let's assume that this guy's walking around. One of the points that you had made earlier that I thought was very interesting: to a Christian, you can't separate out the Son of God from Jesus. You can't separate out the myths from, or sorry, the miracles from Jesus. So when somebody talks about Jesus, they are necessarily talking about the person that did these things. If there was a person named Jesus that is in fact who the Bible is based on, but didn't do any of the miracles, didn't do any of that stuff, it's not Jesus. Is that
Right, yeah.
is that about right? Yeah, please.
Yeah, you don't get to separate the quote unquote historical Jesus from the divine Jesus. It's either the historical and the divine existed, or I don't buy any of it. Because what's the point in talking about historical Jesus if he wasn't also divine? Because then he's just another dude that walked around,
Right.
2,000-3,000, what the fuck ever, thousands of years ago. There's no separation, so you don't get to. You get to. Sorry, that's the wrong. I'm saying that wrong. You can, but that actually to me invalidates your argument for a divine Jesus as part of the Trinity and was that God became human and died and yada yada yada.
I agree with Oz on this. This is the issue, like, for historians. Did Jesus exist? It's a question of historicity, right? But from a theological point of view, my conclusion is no different than Oz's. Jesus, either if there was a guy or if in a guy, he is a myth. The whole Christian milieu is mythical, right? So whether or not Oz wants to believe there was a historical figure or figures, the reality is that it doesn't really matter for his argument, because the Jesus portrayed in the Gospels is a mythical person. So in that case, I would agree with Oz. Jesus, as it's been relayed as a theology, is a myth, right? But we, historians are kind of like, let's figure out where this movement comes from. And maybe there was this guy. Like, I'm a big fan of the Judas the Galilean. There was a guy, by the way. We talk about in the Gospels this, trying to say during the census of Caesar Augustus. Well, Judas the Galilean, also of Gamala, right, was this guy who led a rebellion against the actual census that's mentioned in the gospel accounts, right? So this is the kind of thing, that we need to understand, that there were historical people in Israel that were Jews that were fighting against the Roman state for various reasons and had various movements. Do I think Jesus as an individual existed? Probably not. Did a bunch of messianic figures appear and maybe get lumped into this Jesus character? Absolutely. That's my academic opinion.
And to me, that when I hear that, and again, I always want to make this perfectly clear, and that this is 100% all respect to Pat and his position on that. But to me, when I hear that, it's a myth. But I'm giving. It's almost like as atheists, when we claim the agnostic atheist position. That's kind of what I hear. Again, my perspective on that position, where it's like, this is what I see, but I have to give room here, because of the hard work and the study and everything, Pat, that you put in. That you still have to hold out, a bit of that. But there's still you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a majority, or at least a good part, that it's like, no, I don't see a good reason to believe in this. And I'll end it with this, and then Pat, I'll let you comment on that. Because I hold, and Nick, I think the last time you and I spoke about this, I even made this point, is as far as following the evidence, just like we follow the evidence with a God claim, the Yahweh, or Allah or whatever, I follow the evidence, and I have as good of a reason to believe there is a God as I do a Jesus, and that's where I stand. So I'll shut up.
So I think that's a good point. So I think, like, if we're trying to find historical Jesus as represented in the Gospels, I think that argument fails, and I would agree with you. In that narrower definition, I would agree. I'm a mythicist for that point. But as a historian, I look at the entire, even before the first century, but I look at the first century and I look at people like Judas the Galilean, right? Let's look at what happened with him. He's from Galilee. He's a popular leader. census comes down from the governor of the region. It's heavy taxation. Again, this is all themes that are represented in the New Testament accounts, or at least one of them. This is the issue with a census where census and taxation being synonymous in the Roman world, by the way. A rebellion where the people are, several years of warfare fought. Ultimately, this person is denounced and killed. The people of the countryside are ravished. Again, the whole destruction of the firstborn may have arisen during this period as a false narrative of an actual historical event. And I don't really care whether or not Jesus existed. I've said this before. I don't care. I'm kind of neutral on the argument. I have my opinion. I believe he's one or more people that have been mythologized. But ultimately, I'm more focused on the movement that is going to become Christianity, particularly, the Pauline form, right? And the other various sects that compete against it for a while. But Christianity is a reality. Whether or not Jesus was a reality, it really doesn't matter for those that are studying the second, third, and fourth century.
And I love that you said that, Pat, because that's where I guess for lack of better expressions, that's where I hang my hat on the mythicism position for me personally. I'm not talking about for anybody else. Is if Paul said either to believe Christ is what was it? I just lost the scripture. Christ is hope or whatever, and to die is gain. And everything pointed to living for and under the prescriptions of this Christ character, and being somebody that was raised under that in that mind frame and that indoctrination. If we can eliminate the Jesus character, like surely eliminate the Jesus character, that this Jesus guy as a historical figure and a divine figure, because they now they want to parcel that out so they don't have to admit that they're wrong in something. If we can eliminate that character, whether you believe in the old school version of Christianity or a new school version of Christianity, or and I agree with you, the Paulinism is what I call it. Paulinism, it all crumbles, because Paul's gospel is based on Christ crucified and resurrected. And if we can eliminate the validity of that character, it all crumbles. And that's why I don't I did for a while, and again, I'm just talking for me right now. I got sick of towing the line of, oh well, I'll give you that, or I'll give you that, or I'll give you this, I'll give you that. Because no, I'm not going to continue to give that, because I don't have evidence that merits me just giving you, that argument. And so when I look at it, I'm thinking not just for me, but what if there's somebody that, never types in the chat, in the live chat, never makes a comment, never does, but they find our channels, plural, all of us, and they come across these discussions, and they're like, holy shit, they're talking about what I've been thinking about. And they're not afraid to challenge this shit, and that's, again, I'm singular talking about me right now. That's my passion in that, is I want people to be able to say, you know what, I am going to question that. I am going to push back. I am going to ask for evidence. I am going to require something better than, well, the Bible fucking says so. And I'm not saying, obviously, Pat, I know you've done way more research than I have. I'm not saying that you fall in that, but there's many people that haven't done even an ounce of work, and they need that motivation and they need that inspiration to dig and to read and to study more, to understand, is this Jesus guy worth investing your entire life into? That you literally make life decisions based on this Christ motherfucker.
So
my answer to that question is no.
But this is one of the things, and I don't think you reject this at all, Oz. I suspect what I'm about to say you're going to agree with, but I'll say it and bounce it off you. this is why. So, like, I have taken anti-theism very seriously, and I had the Atheist Codex, and this whole anti-theism project, and I've done a lot of. Nowadays, I've been spending more time on YouTube. I still consider myself an anti-theist, and in fact, I still think it's in fact a position that is essentially morally required. You have to be against specifically the classical theism kind of theistic controls and yada yada yada. But if I was given an infinite amount of time to deconvert, 30 people, and we could just sit and chat, and as long as we wanted to, with luck, I could probably deconvert a few. But all my skills and as much time as I wanted to train and yada, 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 I wouldn't be able to deconvert all of them. And the reason is because it takes a village, right? And everybody's got, Jim has had some success using very different techniques than what I use. And Hitchens, had. So for me, what I find interesting is because I think everything you're saying is 100% valid. And what I find interesting is it's an approach that I not only never considered, but I actually had really dismissed up until now, because my view is, well, wait a minute. If you can grant them as much as you can, if you can say, look, I will give you all the charity I possibly can give and every interpretation in your way, and I can still show you why you've got this problem, and I don't need to try to undermine everything. I don't need to try to attack everything. Let's just do this piecemeal. That, in my view, that works better. But when the way you put it, what I really liked that you had said was, you don't grant them that, and you're not even going to go there. And the first thought that I hear in my head is, oh, if you won't grant them that, they won't even talk to you. And I was like, well, no, some of them won't. Some of them won't. And those are the ones that I have much more success with. But some of them are going to sit there and say, oh, come on, you can't be real. And then you start to say, what you say, and they're like, oh, Jesus. And now they're thinking on a level that I would never have been able to get them thinking on, because you just went straight for this is the underpinning. Not even this is true. I'd grant it to you if I could, but I can't. Here's why. And it's a very different approach. And so I think it has, and I've learned this also too, and just watching, you don't go for that right out of the gate. I saw your street epistemology, which I just love watching you do. And, it's not like you just start out with that. And in street epistemology, you never even get to that, to be quite honest, usually. But I just enjoy it because I first of all, you're very passionate about it, and it's not something that I've seen. And so I appreciate you talking about it a bit. But again, I think you're not necessarily saying that. I mean, you recognize that there are people who are going to have other approaches that are also very important. So I think that's So I think that's what I really appreciate you. Yeah. So, but it's one of those, whatever. If you want to say, anytime I was on a stream, I just say Jesus was real, Jesus was real, Jesus was real 3 times. Poof, there he is. It's just it works every fucking time.
So Nick, do you really believe that if you had an unlimited amount of time, you couldn't take a room of 30 people and convert every one of them to a non-theist worldview?
Depends on how you frame the question, but if they have unlimited amount of time for defense and I have an unlimited, yes, I believe I could not succeed, if for no other reason than absolute sheer denial, and the fact that there'd be people who need it so badly and cling to it so much that there is no amount of rational discussion that would work. Now, there are, by the way, atheists who don't engage rationally. I'm not a big fan of them, but they might be able to reach some of those people in some other way. But no, I could not. I don't think anybody would. There's too much of a variety of human beings, how our needs confluence with how we process information. And there are some who would just look at me too and say, you know what, this is a liberal elite, ivory tower elite who, and I'm not going to believe or accept a word he says just because he's one of those snobbish ivory tower elites. And the kind of person that could reach that person is someone other than me.
Real quick, this is completely off topic. We can jump right back in. I'm just looking at the chat, and I'm very familiar with DeFreak from other channels, other chats. I just want to say that we should all be respectful of Nick and his show and his platform, and do your goddamn best to keep the chat on topic to what Nick has going on the show, and be respectful of that, and not go on a bunch of other tangents, because then it just appears to the the content creator that you're not really paying attention to what's going on here. You just have your own narrative, your own motive for being there.
I sincerely appreciate that, Oz, and I think you're absolutely right. Thank you very much for that. We do have, and our mods are actually on contact on the back end on the Discord, and we have a bar, and if it gets hit, Titan is absolutely going to take care of it, and Titan's on it. But you're absolutely right. So Titan's it's gonna be completely under. Titan's got it exactly where he wants it. So we'll.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I respect Titan helps us with a ton of shit. And I get all respect. That's just me as a fellow content creator reading. Like, come on, guys, come on.
So I'm gonna push back a little bit, Nick.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say that I'm not a sociologist, but I'm gonna channel one right now. Many, and I'm just gonna say many. I'll say most, but I won't say all. Most people that identify within a religious framework are into dogmatically and doctrinally their indoctrination, right? They're an indoctrinated world. So this indoctrinated worldview is largely socially normative, right? So one of the big purveyors is social normalism within their framework. So we've seen this with Christianity in the last 30 years on the topic of homosexuality and gay marriage, right? We've seen a shift within, I'm going to largely use the word Christian worldview, right? Mm-hmm. If you would have polled Christians in the 1950s on the topic of homosexuality, we would have got somewhere, and I'm guesstimating, don't hold me to this, but I'm sure we would have got somewhere between 80 and 90% of Christians would have said homosexuality is a sin, it's abhorrent, and it would all be doctrinally founded. Right? It would be a socially normative view within that religious group. We poll people today. I can't remember the exact poll that came out of various institutions and polling groups. I think Reuters had one where it was something like 60% of Christians now are like homosexuals are okay as far as stepping back and from doctrinal point of view, a view of tolerance, right? Which would not have been the 1950 view, right? So we've seen a social normalization, even within Christianity, of homosexuality, whether or not you want to get in all the nuances of various degrees of acceptance. I will reserve that argument for a later date. But I think Christianity in of itself is a social normative behavior model, right? So like I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm actually not going on a limb. I'm very comfortable debating the same point. Modern Christians are not ancient Christians.
Yes.
When a modern Christian tells me, oh, well, in the first century, I usually can prove them wrong. Like when modern Christians talk about anything within Christianity, first century and second century Palestine is an area I'm well versed in. I'm more than comfortable taking you on any topic in that period. When people talk about capitalism, I go, well, if you're a capitalist, you're not a Christian. And they go, what do you mean? I'm like, well, it's demonstrable. In the first century, Christians weren't capitalists. They were communalists, which by modern extension, they were communists, right? They were theological communists. Well, that's not true. Actually, it is. Everywhere in the text it talks about it, you're wrong, right? Like I can do this all day long. I can go both in the scripture and outside the scripture to liturgical and actually into historical sources to show that one of the resistance to Christianity was their egalitarianism monetarily. The fact that Romans had a system that did not like this use of familial wealth for the betterment of society in general, right? Romans didn't want their kids becoming Christians and then giving all their money to churches, right? We can find numerous, both in ancillary historical and directly from the scriptures themselves, historical perspectives. Modern Christians who talk about prosperity gospel aren't Christians, in my opinion. They're a version of Christianity because they take the label, but they're not Christians in the modern sense. Christians who are capitalists aren't modern Christians. They're Christians in a modern sense, but they're not Christians in an ancient sense. Ancient Christians would look at modern Christians and they'd be revolted. Particularly since ancient Christians were almost, in the first century, were almost without a doubt apocalypticists. They were waiting for the return of Jesus in its immediacy, which modern Christians are. They say they are, but they're really not, because they have retirement plans and 401ks, and they're paying for their funerary lots in advance. So they're really not apocalyptists in the way the first century Christians were, particularly people like Paul and even Jesus, right? If he existed and Jesus is a myth, that's for you, Oz. So that's just, I'll take a moment to step back out of it.
I tell you what, I will, because Oz is here, and just as I will slip in at some point before the end of this, one token. I will say it once for Oz before we're done with the show, but please continue. I caught Pat mid-drink.
You did, and alcohol is flowing. You know, the whole thing. I think Jesus would be awesome if he did turn water into wine, because I'd be following that fucking guy everywhere. I'd be like the biggest lush. I'd be like, is he going to Canaan again? You know, because could you imagine the headlines? You know, itinerant Jewish philosopher turns water into wine. I'd be like fucking there. Like, you know, again, if Jesus I would be all 100% Jesus if it wasn't wine, it was ouzo. You're turning water into ouzo? Fuck yeah, I'm there. Wine, dude. I just get tired and go to sleep too early.
I feel like Jesus. I feel like Jesus was the.
Please, Oz.
Mine's really, really quick, and Nick's so old he probably don't even know what I'm talking about. But I think Jesus was the author of the hip hop song that 𝐒𝐤𝐜𝐜𝐸 claims he wrote. Call it what you want to call it. I'm a fucking alcoholic. I think Jesus wrote that originally, and then 𝐒𝐤𝐜𝐸 did the remix.
Well, so I wanted to quickly hit 2 points. First of all, and I think this is one because everyone's always talks about there are 50 according to the Catholic Encyclopedia. Last time I looked up on it, I haven't seen it, but according to the Catholic Encyclopedia, 55,000 denominations of Christianity, and I think that's just in the U.S. I think, but. That number is very misleading, and the reason it's misleading is because what they say as a denomination is it doesn't have to do with theology; it has to do with where they send their money. So, you know, if a church doesn't give money to the Catholic Church, even if they call themselves Catholic, even if they follow the doctrine, there are different denominations. So, the number of actual denominations is closer to about 3,000, and what that means is these are denominations that are. I like to say I get in trouble with this, but I like to say excommunicative. If you are in another denomination, you don't count in their denomination, and you're not going to get saved, and so on and so forth. So that's how I refer to it. So about 3,000 mutually excommunicative sects of Christianity. But when I'm talking about this, and I say only one can be right or whatever, I like to go to the other part of the argument, which is, with the possible exception of, say, Opus Dei or one of the really far out there ones, every single one of these people is a heretic 200 years ago. Just 200 years. We're not talking 1,000. 200 years ago. Every one of them is a heretic. Every one of them deserves to be burned. And so if they're sitting there saying, well, I have found the real Jesus, I don't have to compare you. I'm not going to compare you to just what's out there, the alternatives today. Think of all the people who died for a version of Christianity that is so unbelievably brutal. So it's like, I mean, that's a high bar to try to say why you're right and all of these people were wrong. So I love getting into that recognition that all of these guys are they'd be atheists. 200 years ago, they're like, oh no, you're an atheist. Well, no, I believe in Jesus. No, you're an atheist because you don't go to church for 12 hours every Sunday. So,
Preacher.
So but for me, what I was alluding to specifically is, you know, human beings have such a variety of needs and of ways that they communicate and how to engage with them, how to establish a rapport, trust, and there's no one that's going to work across everybody. And so if there was a room of, say, 30 random Christians, and you said, okay, Nick, you've got an unlimited amount of time to deconvert them. Now, the reason Christianity is weakening is because it is a social construct, and the entire society is moving it in this direction. But that takes the work of a whole bunch of atheists, non-theists, and even Christians who are like, I want to think about this or engage on this topic, and they can hit all of the other people there. Anything I could contribute would be a small amount. And so the idea that, okay, put me in a room with 30 individuals. The fact is, some of them will sit there and say, that Nick guy is one of the smartest guys I've ever met. And some will sit there, that Nick is an idiot, he's a clown, and he's one of the... Yeah, I see you shaking your head there, asshole. Yeah. Listen, it's 30 people. I only got to get one to say that. There's got to be one guy in 30 that'll say that. But at any rate, and then you're going to get everywhere in between. And so I could maybe have an impact with some of them. And then there's some who aren't going to care, but then they're going to hear what I have to say and say, okay, yeah. But there are some that with an unlimited amount of time, I still don't have the skill set. My communication patterns aren't correct. The assumptions that I make aren't correct. So somebody else would have much more success with them, but not necessarily with the ones that all of a sudden I can connect with right away, and they can sit there and say, oh my God, I never thought about that. I'll say, yeah, and people say, Nick, you're a miracle worker. Nah, it was easy for me because I'm there with that person. But then I take a look at what they do, and I was just like, how the fuck did you do that? They're like, Nick, I just said Jesus is a myth. So yeah, that's what it takes all kinds kind of thing. There's different approaches, and they are all fucking important.
I want to get Jake in here, but one thing before I go, please. I'm going to tell you. So recently I took a class on an introduction to textual criticism and historical analysis of the first century, right? Particularly, again, that's the caveat of being an instructor, right? I'm able to teach sometimes some classes that I want to teach because of some things I've learned. I typically challenge my class, as an assignment, take home, they had to do it on their own. I challenge them to find the Beatitudes, right? The blessed are the people, statements, and had them compare Matthew to Luke, and then come back after doing a line-to-line comparison with those two sections of text and realize that they're entirely different and that they've been harmonized. The only way you get the Beatitudes to work in the form that we accept them today is to harmonize them, because both of those texts present very different worldviews on basically Christianity. Blessed are the poor in spirit is not that's Matthew. That's not Luke. Luke is blessed are the poor, physically poor, versus those that are poor in spirit, right? Like if you actually go line by line in the text and do a very critical analysis, they're preaching two different gospels. And why would Matthew and Luke preach different gospels? That's a class you can take and pay me to take online, and I'll be more than happy to point you to my institution for that. But no, jokingly, but yeah, you need to sit there and actually look at the conflict even within different gospels as to what Christianity is, rather than harmonizing them. Because Luke was written for Luke's audience, and Matthew was written for Matthew's audience, Mark was written for Mark's audience, and John was just written for anybody who'd be willing to fucking listen that Jesus is like a god. So that from that point of view, again, we'll go back and support Oz with his Jesus is a myth statement, because that's what the gospels are doing for the Lord.
And Jesus is a myth.
Hell yeah.
One out of oh Jesus. Okay, so there's a comment in the live chat. The two comments. First one, let's move away from this trolling bullshit. The next comment from the same fucking asshole is 1 out of 30 people think Nick's $999 suit jacket was worth the investment. Yeah.
Well, it's one thing to troll. It's one thing to troll in the chat. It's the other thing to troll the host.
Oh, hypocrisy much. Thank you.
I did grow up Christian. I was a Christian. I was a Christian for 30 years. That's all I know.
Okay, you know what? That's a get out of jail free card for a lot of bullshit now, isn't it? Oh, Jake, how are you? Good to see you. Thank you so much for coming in. And I couldn't hear you. I don't know if you were. No, we cannot hear you. You're not muted on our end, but that was a good guess. I mean, that's always the safest place to start, is that you've been muted on In Time's End. That's usually a pretty good safe bet, but not this case. We've actually done pretty well on sound for the last week. Jesus is a long Jesus. I think we're going to have to revisit the policy of letting the guests make their own name tags. I'm just saying. Why do I have a feeling I got a really trolly one coming up? All right, well, so while Jake is sorting that out, hey, I'll take a pause. You know what? I'm thinking maybe wrap this up in about 15, 20 minutes, maybe a little longer if people are interested. But I'm thinking, it's midnight here. So I think I heard you for a second there, Jake. I heard you for a split second and then lost you. So, but if you know what, please like and subscribe. It really does help us out with the algorithm. So I'll take the moment to say that. So if you're watching this, if you like the content, share it too. That really helps. So I hope you'll do that. That's just a great way to support the channel and to make sure that we can keep providing this kind of content, because we need to have viewers and people who want to come on, and that takes having a reasonably successful channel. So please like and subscribe. That's a huge help. Hey, Jake, how are you?
Great. How you doing?
Oh, we're doing good, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, so I wanted to put my 2 cents in on the mythicism. Like, I consider myself agnostic to whether or not Jesus actually existed or not. It doesn't really matter. The whole text is BS. But it's been said by a number of people, like the idea that an itinerant rabbi in the first century lived and died is basically the most mundane claim you could make. So for me, it ends up being at least 2 stories about a particular person in the text has to be true in order for Jesus not to be a myth. If it's just 1 or 0, it's just ideas about somebody. I have this friend, Chris. He got into a car accident in high school. He died. They brought him back in the ambulance. He went on to become a preacher, and I can show you news articles showing all this. The question is this Chris a myth, or is this Chris a real person? And these news articles really exist, and some of them even say Chris on it. But the person I think of when I say Chris is actually named Kyle, and I haven't known this Kyle person since I was in. He went to my church, and I haven't seen him in like 25 years or something like that. Never was really friends with him. In this case, there's a person, but the name is different. These stories exist, but they don't actually attach to this individual person. So this is an entirely constructed myth. And mythicism, mythicists do make a really good point. They have a really good case, in my opinion, that we don't have enough evidence to say, yes, this person did exist. And we don't have enough evidence to say, no, this person definitely did not exist.
But of course, yeah, and there, of course, would lie. If you don't have enough evidence to say he existed, the assumption kind of has to be he didn't, because the burden is on the people saying he did. Please, Oz.
Yeah, I was going to say that I've never encountered anyone that, my dad's been in the mortuary business for 40 years now. There's never been a question of if somebody did absolutely exist. Like they either did or they did not, and that's why, to me, it's the lack of evidence we have for this Jesus character that was supposedly divine just crumbles every time you start to analyze it. So I just, like, I understand what you're saying, and I do. I choose to respect position of yours or Pat's or whomever's that differs from mine. But to me, at the end of the day, if there was a character named Jesus, a character, not 2, 3, 4, a character named Jesus that was divine, and he was walking on water, he was turning water into wine, he was taking dirt and spitting in it and turning it into mud and rubbing it on blind people's eyes and helping them to see. If that actually happened, there would be at least a sentence or two written about this person that was contemporary, literature. We lack and have nothing to support that. So for me as a mythicist, until we have that, that's why I said earlier, I apply the same standards of evidence and requirements for a God claim as I do the Jesus, God in human form claim. Is I need the same evidence for that guy as I do for God, and I don't have good evidence for either. So until then, not only am I an atheist, I'm a mythicist.
Well, and that's a good point, because I always forget that one too. And we had this discussion with what is the definition of atheism show like 2 days ago. But it's false that you cannot prove a negative. There are plenty of negatives you can prove. Usually, it's based on the fact that, okay, if this were true, what's the evidence I would expect to see? If I don't see that evidence, okay, if I said, prove that there isn't a black hole between here and the sun, well, that's pretty easy to do. If there were a black hole between, somebody's being awfully loud. If there were a black hole between us and the sun, we wouldn't be here. We would expect that this planet couldn't exist. Ergo, or the one that he gave when he was here, I think was, is there an elephant in the next room? Well, I could go look in the next room, and if I don't see an elephant, and we all know what an elephant is, so you have certain expectations, and if those expectations aren't met, you could say, okay, I have just proven a negative. I've proven that there isn't one in the next room. If there was a guy doing all of these things, why did nobody else? I think what you're saying is, why did nobody else write about him anywhere except in the Bible, which was not written by anyone at the time, but a good deal later? Is that right, what you're saying? Yeah.
Which. Yeah, and Nick, I 100% understand and agree with what you're saying. And I was not even attempting to assert that we can't prove a negative, because I think we can. I think we can do that in some cases. But what I was talking about is like human life. Like typically we can, especially nowadays, obviously in modern days, we that's easy to track down, right? But if we go back even to ancient times like that, and we look at how royalty and kings and all that, anything and everything that it's recorded, it's documented. So to try to convince me personally that there's this guy named Jesus doing all these things, I won't go through them again, but doing all of these things that are attributed to him, the divine nature, and then he died for 3 days. So he had a 3-day-old dead carcass. And again, I've asked my dad, I don't know how many times, Dad, I want to make sure I understand it right. As somebody who's been in the mortuary business, like, dead bodies. What does a dead body look like after 3 days? What does it smell like? What's it doing? And the descriptions, again, a professional in that field, and then he just pops up, and it's like, hey guys, I'm here, but nobody records this shit. No, nobody's writing this shit down. You got to be out of your goddamn mind.
No, that's an excellent point that I've not often thought about. Every time I talk to Oz, I move more towards mythicism. So he may get me there before too much longer. All right. Well, what I think I'm going to do is, I think it's about time to start wrapping this up. So was there anything that anybody else just wanted to get in their last words on this topic? And then if anyone wants to also tell us where they can be found, so that anyone here who wants to see more of you guys knows where to find you. So topics and or where to find you. Anybody? Let's start with Pat. Where can people find you, and any final thoughts?
Well, for final thoughts, as far as a divine come to earth version of a triune God, I agree with Oz. Jesus is a myth, and that as far as trying to determine if there is a historical root, I lead towards the chimeral view that there are numerous people that get conflated into Jesus. Jesus is not a divine being, and if you try to assert Jesus as a divine being, then I'm going to have to jump on the mythicist bandwagon, because if I'm given a binary choice, that's the choice I'll make. If you want to find me, I do have a YouTube channel. Has really nothing to do with religion other than ancient religions of the ancient peoples, pre-Christians in Britain, that I've just started. I did a summer 6-week edition of things I've done as an archaeologist. Put together some videos, some sites I've toured in Cornwall, Wales, and Scotland that are late Neolithic, early Bronze Age, looking at some of those megalithic structures. You can do that at Discovering Ancient History with Pat Lowinger on YouTube. You can just look up Pat Lowinger YouTube and you'll find it. I have some content going up this week, and additional content. I do have a blog, Discovering Ancient History, and where I put some articles and different things up there. Particularly one, I do a short analysis of the fraudulent versus original or genuine Pauline epistles. You can look that up. And if you want to follow me, I have Twitter and all that normal stuff on Facebook. So yeah, I look forward to hearing from you. And I find this topic fascinating, but I'm not committed either way. So that's a good thing.
I'm really glad we were able to have this discussion, because I think it's an important discussion to have, and I used to not think it was important to have. I was just like, does it really matter? And now I'm more and more convinced it's important, and I certainly enjoy having the topic, especially with someone who's thought about it as much as. So Oz, where can people find you? And do you have any final thoughts on the topic?
You can find me in St. Louis. No, I'm sorry. As soon as you said that, it reminded me of a hip hop song. The easiest thing, go to our website, www.tart.live, TART.live. We have a show, I feel like it's almost every day of the week. We have stuff going on, and we have a debate coming up on the 5th, so November 5th. Captain Dadpool and Zach from Adherent Apologetics on the age-old topic, does God exist? But tomorrow night, we have a Halloween show, and you just never know with the old Tang crew what you're going to get yourself into with a Halloween show, because we are devil-worshipping, God-hating, sin-loving sons of bitches. But no, yeah, tart.live. Check us out, and hashtag Jesus is a myth. Thanks for having me, Nick.
Oh, thank you so much for coming. And Jake, tell us a little bit, any other final thoughts on this, and or where people can find you? I will be dropping these links in the live chat. So if anybody's listening to this and you want to find anyone, you will find the links in the live chat. So thank you, Titan, for that. So they'll be easy enough to find, but please tell us more. So Jake, what are your thoughts, and where can we find you?
Yeah, I'm gonna go check out Tart and see if I can look up some more stuff on mythicism from their point of view. Always interested to hear more. And for me, I don't have anything new on my channels yet. I do play games on Twitch, Jake3D on Twitch. But I'm still working on stuff for the Jake4D on the YouTube. And I'm on the Discord. Definitely sign up for the get onto the End Time Discord. And I'm on there if anybody wants to say hi or have a discussion or anything like that. I'm always up for that.
Definitely, yeah. Checking out Tart Tang. It keeps changing. I don't know. If you check out the Atheist Network group, check out Oz's channel. He's they have actually a lot of different people doing different shows there, and there's doesn't matter what you're interested in, you will probably find somebody who does something worthwhile there. So definitely check that out, Jake. I think that's except for Oz, I watch Oz likes to DJ at the middle of the night, and I was just like, I can't sleep. Oh, Oz is DJing. I'll be out in 5 minutes. I watch his late night DJs. So all right, and then let's see. I don't think I've missed anyone. Pat, yeah, I think I got everyone. All right, perfect. So, and then Jake just dropped a link to the Discord in the live chat. So thank you for that. I'll be in the Discord probably in about 5 minutes just to wrap things up and catch up with anybody else who was in the live chat who wants to catch up with us. Anyone here who wants to join me in the Discord, please do so. Like I said, I'll be there in about 5 minutes. Otherwise, we will see you next week for regularly scheduled In Time on Tuesday, Overtime on Wednesday, and this show, as always, 10 p.m. on Friday. So thank you all for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great Halloween, and have a good night all.